Okay, so I know I just said something very similar about another new show that I've watched the first episode of recently, that being Mau Mau Heroes of Pure Heart. But in my quest to find a show to fill the void left by Star vs. the Forces of Evil, I really do, this time, think I have found a show which might do that. And more. I want to be clear about that right out the gate. This isn't just, hey, I think this show might be close to as funny as Star with some neat action, like with Mau Mau. I genuinely think that this show could potentially be the next big thing, the next Steven Universe, or Gravity Falls. The show in question is Amphibia, a new Disney Channel show, and the episode we're going to be talking about today is the very first episode, Anne or Beast. After the opening of the show, which spoils something from this episode, but I'll talk about that in a second. The episode actually opens in what appears to be another world, or at the very least, a remote part of our world, where anthropomorphic, intelligent frogs live in a society within this swampy place. One of them, while heading home from the bar, bumps into what he perceives as a monster, and so runs back into town the next day to warn everybody about the monster. They start getting all riled up. Meanwhile, though, a family rolls into town, consisting of, I think he's supposed to be their grandfather, a very young frog who is still at least partially a tadpole, and then sort of an adolescent frog named Sprig. Sprig wants to prove himself, and so when he hears about the supposed monster, he goes out into the woods to hunt it down and ends up getting captured by it, and it turns out to be a human girl. And this is the first time we really get a good sense of the scale of this place. We can see from Sprig, compared to the girl, Anne, that the frogs in this place are larger than regular frogs. But you can also see things which seem even larger than they should be relative to the frogs themselves. Like we see some insects which seem roughly the right size compared to the frogs. Those seem to be the ones that they trade like produce. But then some of the plants seem a little too small relative to the frogs, but other plants seem a little too big relative to the frogs, and there are definitely insects flying around that are way big relative to the frogs, and they act like large predators in this world. In fact, after Anne catches Sprig in a rope trap, thinking that he's the same frog who was chasing her around the night before, or maybe even thinking that he's the thing that's about to appear, it's not 100% clear. And the two of them have a bit of a dialogue, and they realize that neither is really a threat to the other. A very large mantis creature comes in. It has been stalking Anne, and even though Anne at first runs off, leaving Sprig hanging there, she runs back and cuts him down automatically. She's just compelled to do it, showing that she is a good person. So later, when the townspeople who have gotten themselves whipped up into a proper mob, when they show up and they rope Anne up and tie her down, Sprig unties her. And you don't get a sense that he's doing this because he feels like he owes her. You get a sense because he recognizes that she's not a bad person, that she's not the monster that they think she is, and that he in turn is a good person and wants to do the right thing. And then when the mantis creature returns and threatens Sprig, Anne runs right in and actually holds it back until the two of them can work together to rope it up with the same rope that had been used to tie her up. Sprig even gets a chance to prove himself to his family like he wanted to when he defends Anne, when he stands up for her to the entire mob from the town, proving that not only is he brave, but he has the resolve to stand up for what he believes in, even when people are telling him not to. To Sprig and the other frog people here, Anne does look like a monster. They clearly have no idea what a human is. So there is nothing about her appearance which endears her to him, which really says something for what kind of impact her actions and her words have made on him. And likewise, we can see Anne reacting to his behavior in the background. You can tell that he's made quite the impression on her as well. The episode ends with Sprig's family taking Anne in for at least the 2 months until the mountains which surround this Amphibia place are passable again and she can start looking for a way home. Even though the townspeople, again, want to run her off just to be safe, they're clearly meant to represent racists of some kind, which I think is interesting. I really look forward to seeing what they do with that. And then Anne kind of describing what's going on here as she understands it. She believes herself to be in a different world from the one that she came from, and we do get a scene at the very end which shows us, the audience, that at the very least she believes that it looks like some kind of treasure box or music box or something is responsible for her being here. In fact, we saw it in the opening, and yeah, it definitely is. The box was clearly magical in some way, and is clearly responsible for her ending up where she ended up. And I'm sure you're thinking at this point, well, that's all well and good, AJ. That sounds like a relatively interesting cartoon for kids, which seems to be saying lessony kinds of things. The animation looks pretty from the clips that you've been inserting into this review, but why are you so convinced that it might be the next big thing? Simply put, despite the fact that they did spoil what Anne was in the opening, first of all, how interesting is it that this episode was formatted with this anthropomorphic creature from another world as the viewpoint protagonist? Rather than follow Anne through this story, we follow Sprig. That's such an interesting perspective, and it's one that I legitimately don't think I would have thought of if I were putting this show together myself. So already it's got me hooked in because of that, because already the writing seems a step above most generally good cartoons on the air today. The show also has a feel to it, an aesthetic to it, which evokes things like the foresty Gravity Falls and Over the Garden Wall, while still being its own thing. The aesthetic is similar enough to remind you of those things, and yet still stands alone as its own unique thing. Like, one thing I noticed about this swampy forest that this show takes place in is that it feels big, and yet it's foggy in the background. You can see fog kind of blurring and obscuring distant details, so while it feels big, you can tell it's a big place, it also feels like really tight and claustrophobic, and that's such an interesting contrast to me. Mostly, though, it's that this episode goes very far out of its way to tell us definitively that this show is at least attempting to have complex lore and an underlying mystery. We do see a bit about how Anne got here in the opening sequence to the show, but there's no voiceover narration at the beginning of the first episode telling us what happened very quickly, rapid fire, so that we're up to speed with the story as it stands. We are clearly expected to learn the backstory of this character as the story unfolds around her. Not only that, but there are just enough subtle details in this episode that I already have a theory about where this story is going to go. A theory that I do plan to put into video form and upload to this channel. And I'm sure that if this show has any semblance of a fandom yet, other people have put this same theory together, but I still feel like I need to get this out there. I need people to see it and understand, like, see it as proof as to why I think that this show has as much potential as it has, because I haven't seen this show talked about much yet, and I am really worried that people are going to pass it by. Like, I can't say definitively that this is going to be the next Gravity Falls or the next Steven Universe or whatever. I can only say that it's a well-animated show that's voice-acted well, with characters who are likable and are clearly flawed yet good people, with great deadpan humor and a wonderful aesthetic, which is trying, at the very least, to lay out a long-form story with lots of lore. I can only say that it seems to have magical elements, which, at least so far, are appealing and engrossing. I can only say that so far, it is setting up things which already seem that if they pay off the way they're supposed to, are going to be super interesting and keep the story of this show going for as long as the writers want it to go on. But only if we give it a chance. So, like, I totally don't do this, but I'm going to do it here, and I'm going to do it for that theory when it comes out, probably in a couple of weeks. But Share this video. If I have convinced you to give this show a chance when otherwise you wouldn't have, share this video with a friend in real life, somewhere online, on Tumblr or on Twitter, something. Share it around, get the word out that this show exists and that it might be good and that maybe we should be keeping an eye on it, because I'm certainly going to be keeping an eye on it. I may even turn this into a weekly review series. I don't know yet, but I kind of expect that I will. I might even do sort of an ancillary video, a compilation of my top 10 questions that I already have about this world that I definitely feel like we're going to have solved for us within the narrative of the show. Something along those lines. Like, that's how much this show has already gotten me thinking. Like, for example, Anne thinks that she's in a different world than the one that she came from, but we don't even know that for sure yet. Like, there you go. There's a freebie. Maybe that served to draw you in more than the review itself did. As per usual, though, guys, if you have seen the very first episode of Amphibia, what did you think of it? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over in my Discord, link in the description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.